Now let me introduce you to another person of 1888, E.J. Wagner, as you know. He was the son of J.H. Wagner, who was the editor of the Signs of the Times, Doctor of Medicine, and later himself became editor of the Signs of the Times together with A.T. Jones, who was the co-editor. I just want to tell you a little bit of the background or these circumstances of 1882. In California, I'm telling you this because just so that you can get a glimpse of, if you were there, how would you have felt as a Seventh-day Adventist in California when this was happening? Sunday legislation was being enforced. And when for example, let me show you this one here, Sacramento Daily Union, this was the newspaper, published an article, as you can see there, the Sunday Law, trial of the first case of violation of the law in this city in 1882. Now, W.C. White, Ellen White's son, was arrested for violating the Sunday. He was accused of carrying on publishing in the publishing house on Sunday, and he was arrested. So it really hit home when, if you were an Adventist in California, you know, you were seeing these things happening. People, believers being arrested. And so when the conference met together, there was if you were there, if I was there, I would be feeling very excited. It would be a solemn occasion because of what was happening. And there would probably be a lot of prayer, a lot of heart searching. Are we ready for what is about to happen? Because for the previous 40 years, why had the church been preaching and teaching? That this very thing was going to happen, that the Sunday laws were going to come, and that God's people would be brought before courts. And this very thing was now happening. So the delegates at that conference made a resolution. And E.J. Wagner was there. He was from California. So they made this resolution: whereas stirring events at the present time show that important prophecies upon which we took our stand years ago as a matter of faith are now approaching their fulfillment, thereby confirming the correctness of our position, resolved that we feel called upon to go forward with renewed courage and energy. Now, E.J. Wagner was present at this conference, and he was sitting at the back, or aloof, a little bit further away from the main congregation at one point during a meeting, and something happened to him. Remember when Ellen White wrote the testimony that God will raise up those among us who are taught by the unction of the Spirit of God rather than by literary institutions. That was in 1882. Now, what was happening in 1882 to E.J. Wagner? Notice what he said here. I don't have this on the slide, but I'm going to read it to you. Years later, he said, he actually wrote this down. The conference where he was sitting in this meeting, he says, "At that time Christ was set forth before my eyes, evidently crucified for me. Not a word, nor a text have I ever known. All that has remained with me was what I saw. Suddenly a light shone around me, and the tent was for me far more brilliantly lighted than if the noonday sun had been shining. And I saw Christ hanging on the cross, crucified for me. In that moment, I had my first positive knowledge, which came like an overwhelming flood, that God loved me and that Christ died for me. God and I were the only beings I was conscious of in the universe. I knew then by actual sight that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself. I was the whole world with all its sin. And I am sure that Paul's experience on the way to Damascus was no more real than mine. I resolved at once that I would study the Bible in the light of that revelation, in order that I might help others to see the same truth. I have always believed that every part of the Bible must set forth with more or less vividness that glorious revelation, Christ crucified. So what happened to Wagner? In 1882, God was rising him up and teaching him by His Spirit, leading him to the Scriptures. And he was careful to study the truth of Christ and Him crucified, the gospel in the Bible. God gave him light. Another person that we see is A.T. Jones, an Army veteran, served until 1973 in the armed forces. He loved to study history. He spent a lot of his spare time in the army reading through historical books, and he filled his mind with facts. In 1874, he was baptized in SDA Church. He became assistant editor of Signs in 1885, and Jones defended religious liberty before Congress in the year 1888. Now, this was another man that God used to give a special message. So let's have a look at the atmosphere of 1888. It was loaded with a few different things we need to consider.